Scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere, and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. Well, I can't stand it when someone says to you, yes or no. Just answer the question, yes or no. And it just feels so confrontational, and it feels like I don't want to answer yes or no. And I hate this question, and I feel like so many times we're trapped into people who want us to take clear-cut sides, to sit there and say, yes or no, right or left, red or blue, whatever, okay? They just want you to take a clear side. And if you are not willing to take their side, then they say that you are on the other side and you are now the enemy, all right? It's an age-old tactic. I can't stand it, and it's what they're trying to do here. Now, what's interesting is these two groups come to Jesus, the Pharisees and the Herodians, and it says that they plotted to entrap him. And what's interesting is that the Pharisees and the Herodians actually hate each other, all right? The Pharisees are totally against Rome. They are totally against the idea that Rome is running things, that they feel Judaism is being oppressed by the presence of Rome. The Pharisees can't stand Rome. Now, the Herodians, as the name implies, are people who are in league with King Herod. And King Herod is the king, and only the king because of the permission of Rome. He's put in as king because he's willing to cooperate with Rome. And so the Herodians represent the people who support the idea that the powers that be should cooperate with the Roman Empire, and that's the way to be left alone. So the Pharisees and the Herodians are at complete opposite sides from each other, okay? They don't like each other, but what they understand is that if they can get Jesus to take a side, Jesus will be neutralized. Jesus will end up offending so many people that his ministry will be harmed. And so they don't actually care which side he takes. What they benefit from is the conflict and the confrontation. So it would kind of be like being interviewed by Fox and MSNBC at the same time. Okay? What they're actually after is the conflict. This is what they want. They both win if they get rid of him. But the problem is that binary thinking is often a trap. Binary thinking gets us in trouble when we start thinking of everything in the world as good or evil, pro or con, in or out, with such clear delineations between them. It can be a trap. Because I don't believe that it is the purpose of God to divide. It is not the purpose to have such clear divisions, but to have us understand the commonalities that we have with one another. And so they go to Jesus and they ask him a trap question. This trap question is, should we pay taxes to the emperor or not? There's no middle ground here. It's yes or no. Pay, don't pay. They're trying to draw him into this divide, and he calls them out on it. And when people try and do this to us, we shouldn't just cave into it. We shouldn't allow ourselves to be called into a divide that we're not feeling. We should push back on it, okay? Don't feel bound by questions that aren't honestly asked. When someone's just trying to trap you, get you to take a side, just don't be bullied. I consider those questions to be almost bullying in the way that they're asked and the tone in which they're delivered. Don't be bullied by it. Walk away. Give the answer that you want. Or, if you're clever like Jesus, give the answer that shows them up, because that's what he does. So he says, show me the coin used for the tax. Now, a few things get translated here in ways that sort of obscure the understanding. It's not the tax per se. It's a very particular tax. So the word that's used there is this word kensos. And we get the word census from it, okay? We get the word census in English from this tax. And the kensos was a very particular tax. It was charged per year per person. That's why we get the word census from it, where you count people. So every person has to pay the kensos. And the coin is a denarius. And as we've often talked about, a denarius is roughly a day's pay for a worker, okay? So essentially, it's basically saying your tax is a day's pay. Now, granted, right now I think most of us would be happy if we said your taxes for the year are a day's pay. Okay? Right now I don't think we would be sitting here feeling oppressed. Okay, all right? But back then, when everyone is living hand to mouth, when everyone is living day to day, all right, a day's pay is a day you don't eat. And so this tax was particularly regressive, all right? So it would basically be like saying, we're going to charge you the equivalent of, say, 8 times the minimum wage, like let's say, which is, around $60, and it's $60 a person no matter what you make, no matter who you are. That $60 hits a minimum wage worker hugely, and that $60 hits other people with hardly any impact at all. And so this tax was extremely regressive. And so the masses hated it because people generally did not make enough money. If you were able to save, you were rich. And everyone else couldn't. So the masses hated this tax. Now Jesus says, show me the coin. And the thing here is that this is what a Roman denarius looks like, okay? There are many of them around. It's not even a particularly rare coin. There were so many of them in antiquity that they're around. And what it has is it has a picture of the particular emperor, the particular Caesar at the time the coin is minted. And then, by the way, through history, the denarius suffered from inflation as well. So over the years, the Roman emperors would change the weight, and they would change the purity level of the silver in the denarius in order to basically inflate the currency. All right, and so that happened, and it happened today. And when you hear about money changers in the temple, the money changers were basically the currency exchange at the airport. All right, which is the absolute worst place to have your money changed. And the idea why you needed to do this was because you weren't allowed to bring that Roman denarius into the temple because it bore the inscription of Caesar, who claimed to be a god. And so this was idolatry. So the mere possession of the coin in the temple was considered idolatry. So when you made your temple offering, if you were a loyal Jew, what happened was you came to the temple, and then you had to convert your currency to temple currency in order to make your offering. And that was where the money changers charged JFK rates on trying to change the money before you brought it into the temple. Okay? And that was what Jesus was furious about, because they were profiting off of people trying to just fulfill their religious obligation. And so that was the offensive piece of the money changers. And so there's a little bit of humor in this, in that these supposedly very religious leaders happen to have one on them. Show me the coin. They're not supposed to be bringing it into the temple grounds. Okay? So it's like having it on them. So it would be like talking to someone, whatever you're talking about that's illicit. It could be any kind of illicit contraband item, and you say, well, show me what one looks like, and the person just happens to have one. So he looks at it, says, okay, great. And then he says, whose head is this, and whose title? Now again, there's a translation thing that happens here, which is that word head is a very specific word. And it's a word, in terms of the Greek, it's a word that we understand in English as icon. So it's this Greek word, also pronounced icon, or actually more like acon, all right, that comes into English as icon. And this is a very, very specific word. Now, we have to remember that Jesus probably wasn't speaking Greek, okay? He was probably speaking Aramaic, which is very similar to Hebrew. And the word that he probably would have used, the word that always gets translated from Hebrew into Greek as icon, is this word, this Hebrew word selem. And that Hebrew word selem is one that any Jewish person would have recognized because it's the word that is in Genesis when it says, so God created humankind in his image, in the image of God he created them. Male and female, he created them. That word image is this word selem, which when they translate the Hebrew into the Greek, they translate selem as icon. Okay? And so when he says, whose icon is this, which again is probably a translation of what Jesus was speaking, since he was almost certainly speaking Aramaic, he probably said, whose selem is this? And when he says, whose selem is this, a Jewish person very familiar with the Torah would have immediately made the connection to Genesis, to this verse. Whose image is it create? Whose image is this, as in the image of God within? So, they answer, the emperors. Now, I learned this verse as Caesar. In fact, it's very hard for me to talk about this verse from memory without saying, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. That's the way I learned it. And again, it's because they chose, in the particular translation that's popular in the Presbyterian Church, the NRSV, they chose to translate Caesar as emperor, okay, because it is a title, all right? Caesar was not, it was just a title that meant emperor. And I think they could have just left it as Caesar, and we understand it. And that word is such a ubiquitous word in different languages. It comes into different languages in various ways. For example, through Slavic languages and then to English, Caesar became Tsar. All right? And in German, it became Kaiser. All right, so you go back, Kaiser Wilhelm, all that, so it became that. It also has there's a very similar word, I believe, in Dutch that is related to that. And so this word Caesar, as ruler, as king, as emperor, went into a lot of different languages. So like when they talk about having the whatever, like a drug czar in the government, that's our drug Caesar. Okay. And so that's what happens. So many words derive from that. So Jesus takes this image and he says, now give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. Give to Caesar things in the image of Caesar. Give to God things in the image of God. And of course, the first level interpretation, understanding of this, is the reminder of what bears the image of God. And of course, that's all of you. You bear the icon of God. You were created in the image of God. So what is created in the image of God? What is in the image of God? What is God's? It's all those things that were in the image of God, and that's you. But I think there's something else going on here. Because remember, Jesus was reacting to this binary that they were trying to trap him in. This binary of saying, is it God or is it Caesar? And that's so often the way we've been taught this passage, that it's about putting a big, bright line, a divide in our lives, and thinking about give to Caesar all the things on the Caesar side of the line, and give to God all the things that are on the God side of the line, as if somehow we could divide our lives so readily into one realm versus the other. But I don't think that that's what Jesus wants us to do. I don't think Jesus wants us to choose sides. I don't think Jesus is trying to say that you're supposed to choose between your duty to God and your duty to humanity, because we have a duty to both. We have a duty to God. We have a duty to the human society in which we live. And he doesn't actually reject either. So what I'm actually hearing this as is inclusive of both of these duties, of recognizing that we have a duty to one another, a duty to human society, and a duty to God, and these are not mutually exclusive duties. But rather, these are things that we need to understand in the way we often understand that faith is complex. And there are a lot of dualities that we live in faith. All right? We talk about faith, about God as being three and one. The entirety of confirmation class is spent on explaining the Trinity, because it is very difficult to explain, all right? To sit there, and you just have to sit there and try and say, they're like, wait, 3, 1, I'm going to fail math class if I go in with that. They're very confused by this. The entire of confirmation class is spent trying to get them to understand that we live in this duality, this complexity. Understanding that Jesus was both God and human, a duality, very complex. Understanding that we have free will and God is in charge of everything. This is a duality that is complex, okay? Most of our faith is comprised of these dualities that we try not to choose between, but rather try to say both can be true at the same time. God can be three and one at the same time. Jesus can be human and divine at the same time. We can have free will and God be in charge at the same time. And I think we have to honor God and honor people at the same time. That we should always strive to honor God as we fulfill our earthly duties, that we don't do anything in our earthly realm that is devoid of honoring God. We do them both at the same time, and always strive to honor people as we fulfill our duties to God. That as we live as faithful people and we try to honor God, we do that while honoring people. We don't sit there and say, I can somehow honor God and not honor people. The two go together. We can honor God and honor people at the same time. And whenever something is only one and not the other, it's kind of off the rails. When we do something to honor people that is not God honoring, that's obviously off the rails. And I think sometimes in religion, we do things that we think are God honoring but are not good for people. And I think that is also off the rails. What we need to do as people of faith is to live in that duality and manage to do both in everything that we do. That we always strive to honor God in a way that honors people, and we always strive to honor people in a way that honors God. Because you know who else was created in the image of God, no matter how flawed? Caesar. Caesar was human, deeply flawed human, but also created in the image of God. And everyone, flawed or not, no matter how flawed, no matter how broken we are loved by God. We are never separated from the love of God. So it's a both and. Giving to God and giving to humanity is not a binary. It's a both. And we have to learn to do both, to choose both, not choose between, not choosing to the exclusion of the other. And this is an integrated faith that I think allows us to resolve that tension that we can feel in our lives. And when we resolve that tension and live in the both, live in the and. So I've decided that when Jesus says, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar and give to God things that are God's, I think the most important word there is the and. That we do the and resolve the tension with an and. And then we can live holistically in the service of God and the service of God's people and be at peace rather than divided internally or externally. Amen.